long before the first dynasty etched its name into stone, before Egypt counted its years or Sumer named its kings, there are records that speak of rulers who were not born, teachers who did not age, and cities that appeared already complete. Why do the earliest tablets describe knowledge that seems too advanced for their time? Why do king lists measure reigns in tens of thousands of years? Why do civilizations rise suddenly without a clear childhood? And why do the oldest stories insist that humanity was taught, not slowly learning on its own? Before we dive deeper, ignite that like button and prepare for the revelations to come. Tell me in the comments where you are listening from, what time it is there. And as always with our videos, the visuals are here to add context, but they aren't necessary to follow along. Thank you for always having our back. Prepare yourself, and let's dive in. Stone remembers pressure. Along the river plains where human footsteps had once wandered without pattern, weight suddenly fell in straight lines. Mud was pressed into molds, dried into bricks of identical size, and stacked into walls that did not follow the curves of instinct, but the logic of measurement. This shift did not announce itself with celebration. It appeared quietly, embedded in clay tablets that listed grain tallies and labor days, written with a confidence that suggests the rules were already known. In these earliest records, order is not argued for. It is assumed. Someone had already decided how long a day was, how wide a field should be, how much barley a worker deserved. Civilization begins not with inspiration, but with enforcement. The rivers themselves had to be taught obedience. Seasonal floods once spread silt in chaotic generosity, sometimes feeding, sometimes destroying. Then channels were cut, banks reinforced, and gates installed to release water at chosen moments. This is not a small adjustment. To redirect a river without killing the land requires intimate knowledge of slope, sediment, and timing. Modern engineers learn this through equations and simulations. Ancient builders learned it through long observation or inherited instruction. The tablets do not describe experimentation. They describe outcomes. Water will arrive here on this day. The field will drink, but not drown. Certainty like that implies precedent. Calendars emerge at the same moment. Months are fixed to lunar cycles, seasons aligned with solstices and equinoxes, festivals scheduled years in advance. A calendar is memory externalized, a way to store the sky on Earth. Without it, agriculture collapses into guesswork. With it, surplus appears. Surplus feeds specialists, scribes, builders, priests. These roles arrive fully formed, as if the city stepped onto a stage already set. The people who keep the calendar are not improvisers. They are custodians of a system. Early law codes reinforce this impression. Penalties are precise, compensations measured in silver by weight. Justice becomes arithmetic. An eye for an eye is not poetry, it is accounting. To make such a system work, weights must be standardized, scales calibrated, and trust enforced. Archaeological finds confirm this, revealing sets of stone weights nearly identical across wide regions. Consistency across distance implies coordination. Someone decided what was fair and made others agree. Myth preserves a memory of that decision-making power. Stories speak of figures who arrived before kings, who established boundaries and withdrew. These figures are described as watchers, not because they stared, but because they knew when to act. Watching, in ancient language, means sustained attention over time. A watcher notices patterns invisible to those living day to day. When such a person intervenes, the result feels abrupt. One year there is chaos, the next there is law. Writing itself reflects this sudden maturity. The earliest scripts are not crude sketches, but structured systems capable of abstraction. They represent not only objects, but sounds, numbers, and relationships. This level of complexity suggests refinement elsewhere, perhaps on perishable materials now lost, or within a tradition carried orally with extreme discipline. Oral transmission can be precise when tied to survival. Navigators memorize stars, healers memorize plants, surveyors memorize angles. When such memory is finally fixed in clay, it appears complete, not tentative. Architecture follows the same pattern. Temples are aligned to cardinal directions, their corners oriented to the rising or setting of significant stars. Alignment is not decorative. It ties ritual time to celestial time, ensuring ceremonies occur in harmony with the sky. To achieve this, builders must observe the heavens over many years, marking positions with posts or stones, correcting errors patiently. The first monumental structures already display this knowledge, as if the builders had practiced elsewhere. Flood narratives hint at that elsewhere. Many cultures remember a time when waters erased prior worlds. Floods are not only disasters, they are erasers of evidence. Coastal settlements vanish first, taking with them technologies suited to navigation, astronomy, and trade. Survivors retreat inland, carrying fragments of knowledge stripped of context. To later generations, this knowledge feels foreign, elevated, almost imposed. Instruction replaces experimentation because there is no time to relearn from scratch. The social impact of instruction is tension. When rules arrive from outside lived experience, they feel heavy. Myths encode this discomfort as transgression. Teachers give too much, too fast. Humans misuse tools. Balance breaks. The result is punishment, exile, or withdrawal. Read this way. Stories of watchers falling or being bound describe a shift from direct guidance to institutional memory. Knowledge is no longer embodied in teachers, but locked into systems, laws, calendars, rituals. Once locked in, systems resist change. The brick size persists for centuries. The calendar drifts but is corrected. Kings claim divine sanction, yet follow inherited templates. Even conquest preserves structure. New rulers adopt old weights, old gods, old schedules. This conservatism points backward to a founding moment too authoritative to challenge. Foundations harden precisely because they are remembered as gifts rather than inventions. Skepticism often asks why no physical trace of these instructors remains. The answer may be scale. A small group can teach many if the teaching installs self-replicating rules. Once a canal blueprint is known, thousands can dig without knowing why it works. Once a calendar is fixed, farmers obey it without understanding astronomy. Instruction disappears behind labor, leaving behind only outcomes. The teacher is absent, but the lesson remains. The question then shifts. Not who the watchers were, but what conditions produce watchers at all. Periods of instability reward attention. Climate shifts, wandering rivers, migrating coastlines force some people to observe rather than settle. Observation breeds pattern recognition. Pattern recognition breeds authority when shared with those desperate for stability. The watchers may have been the first specialists born of crisis, carrying compressed knowledge across collapsing landscapes. Civilization's first cities are therefore not miracles but scars, places where chaos was cut into order by inherited attention. Every straight wall remembers a decision. Every measured field remembers a watcher who once stood still long enough to see the year as a whole. The city grows, generations pass, and the watcher becomes a story. But the pressure remains, locked into stone and time, insisting that humanity did not stumble into order blindly. Someone was watching when it began. Time becomes dangerous the moment it is counted. Before numbers, days pass like weather, noticed only when they hurt. After numbers, days can be owned, demanded, and punished. The moment early societies fixed the length of a month and declared certain days sacred or forbidden, time stopped belonging to the sky and began belonging to authority. Clay tablets from the oldest cities do not marvel at this transition. They operate inside it. They record debts due on precise dates, rituals fixed to lunar phases, and labor quotas calculated across seasons. Time is no longer a background. It is a tool. This shift alters how memory works. Oral cultures remember by story, by rhythm, by repetition tied to events. Calendrical cultures remember by reference, by coordinates in time. A famine becomes the drought of the 5th year. A war becomes the campaign of the 2nd month. Memory hardens. With it, blame becomes traceable. If crops fail when the calendar promised abundance, someone has violated order. Someone must answer. Astronomy sits quietly behind this transformation. Watching the sky teaches patience. Stars do not care about human urgency. They repeat on their own schedule. To notice repetition requires stillness across years. Ancient sky watchers marked horizons with stones, posts, or notches, tracking where the sun rose and fell over the seasons. Each correction refined prediction. Eventually, prediction became reliable enough to command trust. Trust allowed calendars to dictate action even when immediate conditions disagreed. Plant now, even if the ground feels wrong. Harvest now, even if clouds threaten. Most of the time, the calendar wins. When it fails, catastrophe is framed as moral failure rather than miscalculation. Ritual grows from this logic. If the sky can be predicted, perhaps it can also be persuaded. Offerings align with celestial events. Processions mirror planetary paths. The city performs the sky to keep it cooperative. Priests emerge as technicians of alignment, ensuring that words, gestures, and timings match the inherited pattern. Their authority is not charisma, but accuracy. A ritual performed on the wrong day is dangerous, not meaningless. This precision reshapes space as well. Streets align with cardinal directions. Temples face chosen points on the horizon, and city plans echo cosmological diagrams. The city becomes a model of the world as understood by its calendar. Living inside it means living inside time made visible. Even those who do not understand the logic move through it daily, absorbing discipline through repetition. The cost of this order is exclusion. Calendars require consensus. Those who do not follow them become outsiders, labeled chaotic or impure. Nomadic groups, whose time is flexible, clash with settled societies whose time is rigid. Myths remember these clashes as battles between order and disorder, gods and monsters, light and darkness. In practical terms, they are conflicts between different ways of counting days. Writing amplifies the divide. Once time is written, it can be enforced across distance. A decree written in one city binds another weeks away. Scribes become extensions of authority, carrying time itself on their tablets. Errors are no longer local, they propagate. Precision becomes obsession. Lists multiply. Archives grow. The past is no longer remembered, it is stored. This storage changes how people relate to origins. When rules are written, their beginnings fade. The first calendar becomes anonymous. The first observer becomes legend. What remains is the rule itself, detached from context. Obedience replaces understanding. Over generations, this detachment invites reinterpretation. What was once practical becomes sacred. What was once adjustable becomes eternal. Flood stories resurface here not only as natural disasters, but as temporal resets. When records are destroyed, time fractures. Survivors rebuild calendars from fragments, aligning festivals by memory and guesswork. Discrepancies appear. Different cities celebrate the same event on different days. Authority responds by standardizing again, declaring one version correct. Each standardization erases alternatives, narrowing memory. Power concentrates around those who control synchronization. To set the calendar is to set taxes, festivals, and work cycles. Kings claim this power by associating themselves with celestial order. Crowns mirror the sun. Thrones align with solstices. The ruler becomes a living timestamp, marking the year by presence. When succession fails, time itself feels unstable. Omens proliferate. Eclipses terrify not because they darken the sky, but because they disrupt predictability. Technologies reinforce dependence. Irrigation schedules tied to calendars mean missing a date can starve a field. Trade contracts tied to months mean delays cascade into debt. Precision tightens the web. Freedom narrows. Yet people accept this trade because order feeds more mouths than chaos. Cities swell. Specialization deepens. The calendar proves its worth by sustaining density. Behind all this remains the quiet figure of the observer. Whether imagined as a watcher, a sage, or a lineage of skykeepers, someone had to notice patterns before they could be imposed. Observation is slow, but its products act fast. Once encoded, they outlive observers themselves. The sky continues. The calendar pretends to match it. When drift accumulates, reform arrives, framed as revelation rather than correction. The legacy of early timekeeping is not accuracy, but authority. Even modern clocks, precise to fractions of a second, descend from the same impulse, to bind human action to an external rhythm and punish deviation. Civilization's tempo is inherited, not chosen. Each tick echoes a decision made when the sky was first counted and days stopped being free. Time, once measured, becomes a corridor. It points forward and backward, limiting where one can stand. The early cities built that corridor with care, believing alignment would guarantee survival. They were right often enough to be believed always. And so humanity learned to live inside schedules, trusting that someone, long ago, watched long enough to deserve obedience. Power does not announce itself with crowns at first. It appears as repetition. When the same actions are performed in the same way at the same time each year, authority becomes invisible, mistaken for tradition. In the earliest cities, leadership did not begin with conquest, but with coordination. Someone decided when canals would be cleaned, when walls repaired, when fields rested. These decisions required compliance more than force. People followed because the pattern worked. Harvests stabilized. Famine retreated. Order justified itself through survival. Over time, coordination hardens into hierarchy. Those who manage schedules begin to manage people. Labor becomes divisible, assigned in units measured by days rather than tasks. A worker is no longer valued for skill alone, but for availability within the calendar. This abstraction allows large projects to emerge. Temples rise, walls extend, storage facilities multiply. Each brick carries not only weight, but time, molded during one season, dried in another, placed according to plan. The city becomes a monument to deferred effort. Writing reinforces hierarchy by freezing decisions. A spoken command fades, a written order persists. Tablets preserve allocations, punishments, exemptions. Names appear beside numbers, binding individuals to obligations. Once recorded, debt becomes portable. It can follow a person across seasons and locations. This portability is power. Those who control records control futures. Forgetting, once merciful, becomes rare. Ritual masks this transformation by aestheticizing obedience. Processions turn schedules into spectacle. Offerings transform taxes into gifts. Music marks transitions that might otherwise feel arbitrary. People do not line up to pay grain. They line up to honor the gods. The effect is the same. Storage fills. Redistribution occurs on terms set by those at the center. Myths encode awareness of this shift through stories of stolen fire, forbidden knowledge, or broken pacts. These narratives express anxiety about control disguised as benevolence. When a figure gives humans tools and is punished, the story warns that power has consequences. Tools change relationships. Metallurgy, for instance, does not merely improve weapons, it concentrates production. Ore sources, smelting techniques, and molds centralize labor. Those who manage metal manage conflict and construction alike. Cities respond to this concentration by formalizing roles. Priests interpret signs. Administrators tally resources. Warriors enforce boundaries. Each role depends on the others, forming a closed loop. Entry into this loop requires initiation, training, or lineage. Outsiders remain peripheral, providing raw materials or labor without access to decision-making. Social mobility narrows, stability increases. The built environment reflects these divisions. Elevated platforms separate sacred space from daily life. Thick walls distinguish inside from outside. Gates regulate flow, opening and closing according to schedule. The city teaches hierarchy through movement. To reach the center, one passes through layers, each monitored. Access becomes privilege. Collapse threatens when repetition breaks. A failed harvest, a breached wall, a misaligned ritual exposes the machinery behind tradition. In response, authority intensifies symbolism. Omens are reinterpreted. Blame shifts downward. Purification rituals proliferate. Rather than question the system, leaders insist it has been violated. This reflex preserves structure at the cost of flexibility. Flood memories return here as political lessons. When waters erase boundaries, hierarchies drown with them. Survivors rebuild, but scars remain. New leaders claim to restore lost order, invoking ancient patterns even when conditions have changed. This appeal to antiquity legitimizes control. The older the rule appears, the harder it is to challenge. Across regions, similar patterns repeat. Whether along rivers, coasts, or highlands, dense populations require coordination. Coordination produces managers. Managers accumulate authority. Authority rewrites memory to justify itself. Over generations, the original problem that required coordination fades, leaving behind structure without explanation. People obey because disobedience feels unthinkable. Technology accelerates this process by reducing reliance on individual judgment. Tools standardize outcomes. A plow cut to specification produces predictable furrows, regardless of who pulls it. A mold produces identical vessels, regardless of the potter's mood. Standardization shifts value from skill to compliance. Those who resist standards are inefficient, then expendable. Education adapts accordingly. Instead of teaching observation, it teaches procedure. Apprentices memorize steps rather than principles. This ensures consistency, but limits innovation. Innovation becomes risky because it disrupts coordination. Only those insulated by status can experiment. Even then, success must be framed as restoration, not novelty. The figure of the lawgiver emerges from this environment. Laws claim to originate beyond human dispute, attributed to gods or ancestors. By externalizing authorship, leaders protect laws from critique. If a rule is divine, changing it is sacrilege. This strategy stabilizes society while freezing injustice in place. The calendar that once fed many now demands obedience from all. Yet resistance persists at the margins. Songs, jokes, and local customs preserve alternative rhythms. Farmers adjust planting despite official dates. Traders negotiate beyond written terms. These micro-deviations keep society adaptable. Authority tolerates them until crisis, when control tightens again. Civilization thus oscillates between rigidity and drift. Its early success rests on repetition enforced by belief. Its longevity depends on selective forgetting. The watchers who once observed the sky vanish behind institutions that observe people. Surveillance replaces attention. The direction of watching reverses. Understanding this shift reframes early power not as tyranny imposed suddenly, but as coordination slowly forgetting its purpose. What began as shared survival becomes inherited obligation. Cities thrive, but at the cost of agency. Each generation inherits schedules, laws, and walls without inheriting the reasons they were built. The earliest cities did not trap humanity intentionally. They solved problems too well. Their solutions became permanent, even when conditions changed. Power hid inside habit. By the time anyone noticed, the habit felt like destiny. And so the city endured, teaching humans not only how to live together, but how to obey time, space, and memory itself. Stone does not only build upward, it pushes downward into memory. Once cities learned to stack weight, they learned to stack belief. Monumental architecture is often described as a display of power, but its deeper function is persuasion over time. A wall convinces by enduring. A temple convinces by outlasting generations who forget why it was raised. The earliest monuments appear when societies decide that certain ideas must not move. Mobility is the enemy of permanence, stone anchors thought. The choice of materials reveals intent. Mud brick erodes and must be renewed, keeping memory active through maintenance. Stone resists decay, allowing meaning to persist without effort. When societies invest in stone, they are investing in future obedience. A monument does not argue, it waits. Children grow up beneath its shadow, accepting it as natural. By adulthood, questioning it feels absurd. Alignment intensifies this effect. Monuments face solstices, equinoxes, or star risings, binding human authority to cosmic order. When sunlight enters a chamber on a specific day each year, coincidence is eliminated. The structure appears to communicate with the sky. Ritual transforms this alignment into proof. People gather, Watch light move as predicted, and feel reassured that the same intelligence governs both stone and stars. Authority becomes cosmic by association. Labor hides inside these structures. Thousands of hands shape blocks, haul loads, and fit joints. The work teaches discipline through repetition. Each participant learns to follow instructions, to trust measurements over instinct. The monument trains society as much as it commemorates belief. Completion does not end its influence. Maintenance extends it indefinitely. Writing carved into stone freezes language itself. Words become immune to correction. A law etched into a wall resists reinterpretation. Oral nuance disappears. Ambiguity shrinks. This rigidity is presented as clarity. Disputes are settled by reference to inscriptions, not negotiation. Justice becomes spatial. Walk to the stone, read the rule, accept the outcome. Monuments also manage grief. Death destabilizes hierarchy. Tombs stabilize it by relocating authority to ancestors. The dead, silent and unchanging, cannot contradict successors. By honoring them, leaders claim continuity. The past becomes a shield. Pyramids, ziggurats, and cairns are not merely graves. They are arguments that power transcends mortality. Myths surrounding monuments often describe them as gifts from gods or heroes. This framing obscures the social choice behind their construction. To mobilize resources for non-essential structures requires consensus or coercion. Myth replaces both with inevitability. If the gods demand a temple, resistance is impiety. The cost becomes sacred. Over time, monuments reshape landscapes. Quarries scar hillsides. Roads radiate from centers. Settlements cluster near sacred sites. Geography bends around belief. The city's heart becomes immovable, forcing expansion outward. Social inequality mirrors this spatial arrangement. Proximity to monuments correlates with status. Distance correlates with labor. Catastrophe exposes the fragility of stone authority. Earthquakes crack walls. Floods undermine foundations. Fires blacken inscriptions. When monuments fail, shock ripples through society. If stone can fall, what else is uncertain? Leaders respond by rebuilding larger, reinforcing not only structures, but belief. Scale becomes compensation for doubt. This cycle explains why monuments tend to grow over time. Each generation adds layers, raising platforms, extending walls. The original structure disappears inside accretions, much like the original purpose disappears inside tradition. What remains visible is size, not meaning. Visitors marvel at scale and assume importance. Awe substitutes for understanding. Monuments also standardize memory. Official events are commemorated. Others fade. By selecting what to monumentalize, societies curate history. Victories are carved. Failures are omitted. Over centuries, the stone record diverges from lived experience. Yet stone outlasts memory, becoming the default account. Dissent becomes heresy against architecture. Even absence is monumentalized. Ruins inspire reverence precisely because they endure while purpose dissolves. Broken columns still persuade. They suggest lost greatness, encouraging nostalgia and obedience to imagined pasts. Restoration movements capitalize on this effect, rebuilding not to recover function, but to recover authority. The watchers of earlier ages understood this dynamic intuitively. Observation taught them that what remains visible shapes behavior long after explanation fades. To teach once is fragile. To build is to teach continuously. Monuments are lessons without words, repeating themselves every day. Modern societies inherit this logic. Skyscrapers echo ziggurats, memorials frame national narratives, courthouses borrow temple geometry. The language of stone persists even when materials change. Glass and steel still impose scale and alignment, still persuade through endurance. Civilization's memory is therefore architectural. What it chooses to solidify determines what future generations accept as unquestionable. The earliest cities learned this early and invested accordingly. They did not merely organize labor and time, they organized belief in 3 dimensions. When we walk among ancient stones, we are not just observing ruins. We are standing inside arguments made by people long gone, arguments that succeeded precisely because they survived. Stone does not speak, but it convinces. And once convinced, societies build again, repeating the lesson in heavier forms, pressing memory deeper into the ground. Exchange begins as trust between faces. One hand offers grain, another offers meat, and the memory of fairness lingers only as long as both remain present. The moment cities swell beyond familiarity, memory becomes insufficient. Trust must be stored somewhere outside the body. This is where value detaches from objects and becomes abstract. Early markets do not trade things, they trade equivalents. A sack of barley becomes comparable to a measure of oil, not because they are similar, but because someone insists they can stand in for each other. Weights appear before coins. Smooth stones, carefully shaped, recur across distant settlements with uncanny consistency. Their purpose is quiet, but revolutionary. A weight declares that value can be fixed independent of context. It does not care who produced the grain or how hungry the buyer is. It insists on sameness. Scales enforce this insistence mechanically, removing negotiation from the act of exchange. Once value is weighed, argument ends. This mechanical fairness feels liberating at first. Trade accelerates. Strangers transact without knowing each other's stories. Markets expand beyond local memory. Surplus moves farther, feeding cities that no longer grow their own food. Specialization deepens, crafts flourish. But abstraction carries a cost. When value is fixed, it can be accumulated. When it can be accumulated, it can be hoarded. Clay tablets record this shift with stark clarity. They list loans with interest, deadlines enforced by penalty. Interest is time converted into value, a way to make waiting profitable. It assumes that the future will resemble the present closely enough to repay debt. This assumption holds in stable systems and collapses violently in unstable ones. Debt turns uncertainty into leverage. Money formalizes this leverage. Coins appear stamped with authority, bearing symbols of gods or rulers. Their metal content matters less than their mark. The stamp declares acceptance in advance. It compresses trust into an object small enough to carry. With coins, obligation travels effortlessly. A person can leave a city carrying debts and credits indistinguishable from identity. Value becomes portable and anonymous. Markets reshape social relations accordingly. Work becomes something sold rather than shared. Time becomes divisible into wages. A day's labor acquires a price, measured not in survival, but in currency. This separation allows large projects to hire rather than coerce, but it also allows exploitation to hide behind contracts. When labor is quantified, suffering becomes calculable and therefore negotiable. Trade routes knit distant regions into fragile webs. Tin travels to meet copper, producing bronze far from either source. Obsidian crosses mountains. Shells migrate inland. These movements spread not only goods but standards. Weights, measures, and coin designs propagate along routes, harmonizing markets. This harmonization increases efficiency while amplifying vulnerability. Disruption in one region ripples outward. Cities adapt by building storage and security. Warehouses rise near gates. Guards monitor flow. Taxes shift from occasional tribute to regular levies. Money simplifies taxation. Grain rots. Silver persists. Authority prefers what lasts. As taxes monetize, subsistence farmers become market participants by necessity. To pay, they must sell. Dependence deepens. Religion absorbs economic logic seamlessly. Temples become banks, safeguarding wealth in sacred space. Offerings double as deposits. Priests record transactions under divine witness, lending moral weight to contracts. Breaking a debt becomes a sin. The gods are invoked not to end inequality, but to sanctify it. Wealth accumulation acquires spiritual justification. Myths reflect anxiety about this transformation through stories of cursed gold and punished greed. These tales do not reject value. They warn against excess detached from community. Yet the systems producing excess continue to function. Moral caution coexists with structural incentive. Greed is condemned publicly and rewarded privately. Economic abstraction also reshapes warfare. Armies require payment. Loot converts to currency, financing further campaigns. Conquest becomes self-sustaining. The promise of plunder attracts soldiers. The reality of wages disciplines them. War shifts from seasonal raids to continuous enterprise. Money feeds violence efficiently. Crises expose the fragility of abstraction. When harvests fail, debts remain. When trade routes collapse, currency loses meaning. Inflation appears when authority stamps too much trust into too little metal. Confidence evaporates. In such moments, societies revert briefly to barter, favor, and force. But once stability returns, abstraction reasserts itself. It is too useful to abandon. The watchers of earlier eras understood equivalence as a tool, not a truth. Value was a convenience, adjustable when conditions changed. As systems grew, flexibility shrank. Standards hardened. Adjustments became political acts rather than practical ones. Those who controlled standards controlled survival. Money teaches people to see the world in numbers. Forests become resources. Rivers become routes. People become labor units. This vision enables coordination at scale while dulling empathy. Decisions prioritize totals over individuals. A loss becomes acceptable if outweighed elsewhere. Calculation replaces judgment. Modern economies inherit this lineage directly. Digital credits echo clay tallies. Interest compounds invisibly. Trust flows through systems few understand. The abstraction has become so complete that value often never touches physical form. Yet its power remains absolute. The earliest markets promised fairness through sameness. They delivered expansion through abstraction. In doing so, they transformed cooperation into calculation. Civilization grew rich on equivalence and poor on memory. And once value could move without faces, it moved faster than responsibility could follow, shaping cities that traded not only goods, but the future itself. Violence changes character once it is planned. Before cities, conflict flares and fades, driven by proximity and emotion. With settlement, violence becomes scheduled, supplied, and remembered. The earliest fortifications are not reactions to constant war, but preparations for possible war. Walls stand even in peace, shaping daily movement and reminding inhabitants that threat is permanent. A wall teaches fear quietly, without requiring an enemy to appear. As populations densify, disputes multiply, land boundaries harden, water access becomes strategic, surplus attracts raiders. To protect accumulated value, societies invest in defense, spears lengthen, shields standardize, training replaces improvisation. Violence becomes a profession. Those who fight regularly acquire status, and status demands compensation. Warfare enters the economy. Organization matters more than strength. Units drill to move together, to obey signals rather than instinct. Commands are simplified into gestures and sounds that cut through chaos. This discipline mirrors irrigation schedules and labor rosters, the same logic that coordinates planting coordinates killing. Efficiency migrates easily between domains. Weapons technology reinforces hierarchy. Metallurgy concentrates production. Not everyone can make a sword. Control over metal means control over force. Armories appear, guarded and inventoried. Distribution of weapons becomes political. To arm someone is to trust them. To disarm is to declare suspicion. Authority tightens around arsenals. Narratives adapt to legitimize organized violence. Myths frame war as divine mandate or cosmic necessity. Enemies become embodiments of disorder. Killing becomes purification. This framing protects soldiers from moral fracture while protecting leaders from accountability. If war is sacred, outcomes are beyond reproach. Territory expands through conquest, but holding territory requires administration. Garrisons settle. Roads extend. Taxation follows. War feeds state formation as much as state formation feeds war. Each victory increases the burden of defense, pulling societies into cycles of expansion to sustain themselves. Retreat feels like collapse. Prisoners illustrate the transformation starkly. Early conflicts kill or release. Organized warfare captures. Captives become labor, ransom, or spectacle. Their value is calculated. Mercy becomes strategic rather than emotional. Violence is no longer personal. It is managerial. Rituals surround warfare to contain its psychological cost. Triumphs are celebrated. Losses are mourned publicly. These acts redistribute grief and pride across the community, preventing accumulation within individuals. Monuments list names, converting death into memory. Memory converts trauma into narrative, making it bearable and repeatable. Training embeds violence into youth. Games simulate combat. Initiations test endurance. Courage is praised, fear mocked. By adulthood, obedience in battle feels natural. This preparation reduces resistance to command. When orders come, bodies respond before doubt can intervene. Defensive architecture evolves accordingly. Gates narrow to control flow. Towers provide vantage. Moats delay approach. Each feature channels movement, forcing attackers into predictable paths. Predictability favors defenders, just as calendars favor administrators. Space itself becomes a weapon. Internal violence also increases. Policing emerges to manage disputes before they escalate. Punishments become codified. Public executions demonstrate consequence. The spectacle of punishment deters by example, converting fear into compliance. Violence thus enforces order inwardly as well as outwardly. Technological escalation follows. Siege engines appear to defeat walls, prompting thicker walls, prompting stronger engines. Innovation accelerates under threat. Skills transfer between war and construction. Techniques for moving stones serve both catapults and temples. The line between creative and destructive labor blurs. Trade adapts to support warfare. Supply lines form. Contractors emerge. Weapons and armor become commodities. War stimulates production, absorbing surplus labor and resources. Peace threatens unemployment. Societies accustomed to war find stillness destabilizing. Leaders seek conflict to maintain momentum. Ethics struggle to keep pace. Codes of conduct attempt to restrain excess, defining who may be killed and how. These codes reflect awareness that unbounded violence destroys its own foundations, yet enforcement is uneven. Rules bend under pressure. Atrocities occur, then are forgotten or reframed. Geography shapes martial culture. Plains favor mobility, mountains favor defense. Coastal regions emphasize navies. Each environment produces distinct tactics and myths, yet abstraction unifies them. Maps reduce terrain to symbols. Campaigns are planned on tablets before soldiers move. War becomes a problem to solve rather than an experience to endure. The Watcher's legacy lingers here as well. Observation informs strategy. Knowing seasons, supply cycles, and morale patterns allows leaders to choose moments of advantage. Victory often depends less on bravery than on timing. Armies march when crops are harvested, when roads are dry, when enemies are tired. War follows calendars. Defeat reveals the system's limits. When armies fail, explanations turn inward. Discipline tightens. Training intensifies. Scapegoats are punished. Rarely is the system itself questioned. Instead, failure is attributed to deviation from established patterns. Innovation is blamed rather than inertia. Over generations, warfare imprints itself on identity. Heroes are defined by battles. Founding myths center on conquest. Borders acquire emotional weight. Violence becomes history's engine in hindsight, even if daily life remains quieter. Memory selects drama over continuity. Civilization thus binds violence to order inextricably. The same structures that coordinate cooperation coordinate destruction. Cities promise safety while perfecting harm. This paradox persists because both arise from the same impulse: control through predictability. The early cities did not invent violence, but they made it reliable. By scheduling it, supplying it, and remembering it, they ensured it would return. War ceased to be interruption and became institution. And once institutionalized, violence shaped the world as decisively as any law, monument, or market, carving boundaries not only on land, but in the minds of those who learned to live within walls built to last. Illness reveals the limits of order more ruthlessly than famine or war. A city can store grain and raise walls, but a fever ignores schedules and gates alike. Early societies confronted this threat by folding health into meaning. Disease was not random. It was interpreted. Symptoms became messages. Healing became negotiation with forces assumed to govern balance. In this framework, medicine begins not as science, but as mediation. The earliest healers are not surgeons, but observers. They watch patterns: which plants soothe pain, which wounds fester, which seasons breed sickness. Observation accumulates quietly, passed through apprenticeship and story. Over time, remedies stabilize. Certain barks reduce fever. Certain resins seal wounds. Knowledge remains practical, but explanation turns symbolic. A plant works because a god favors it. A ritual succeeds because timing aligns. Cause and effect are experienced, then clothed in meaning. Cities accelerate this process by concentrating both illness and expertise. Density spreads disease, but it also concentrates healers. Patterns become easier to see when many bodies suffer similarly. Records appear describing symptoms and outcomes. early attempts to stabilize care. Yet these records coexist with incantations and omens. Practical treatment and symbolic explanation intertwine, reinforcing each other. Hospitals in their earliest form are temples. Patients bring offerings alongside wounds. Healing spaces are separated from daily life, creating controlled environments. Cleanliness acquires ritual significance before hygienic rationale is understood. Washing becomes purification. Isolation becomes taboo management. These practices work often enough to persist, regardless of explanation. Surgery emerges cautiously. Cutting the body is dangerous and transgressive. Early procedures focus on external injuries, setting bones, draining abscesses, closing wounds. Success builds confidence. Tools improve. Metal blades sharpen precision. Anatomy remains largely inferred from animals or rare human observation. Dissection is restricted, surrounded by taboo, slowing theoretical understanding while preserving reverence for the body. Pharmacology expands through trade. Spices and herbs travel with merchants. Remedies cross cultures, accumulating layers of attribution. A plant from afar seems potent by distance alone. Exoticism enhances perceived efficacy. Over time, pharmacopoeias form, lists of substances with effects noted, origins recorded, dosages estimated. These lists reveal empirical thinking embedded within symbolic systems. Disease classification follows. Fevers are grouped by duration and intensity. Wounds by depth and contamination. Mental distress is recognized, though interpreted as spiritual imbalance. Treatments aim to restore harmony rather than eliminate pathogens. This goal shapes care gently, focusing on the whole person rather than isolated symptoms. Effectiveness varies, but compassion often accompanies treatment. Public health emerges unintentionally. Practices that reduce disease spread become moral imperatives. Certain foods are avoided. Certain behaviors are restricted during outbreaks. Quarantine develops as ritual exclusion before it is understood as containment. Cities learn that health is collective. One person's illness threatens all. Responsibility expands. Authority quickly notices this leverage. If health depends on obedience to prescribed behaviors, enforcement follows. Priests and administrators regulate diets, festivals, and contact. Illness becomes evidence of transgression. Blame attaches easily. The sick risk stigmatization. Care coexists with control. Epidemics test these systems brutally. When rituals fail to halt disease, panic spreads. Explanations intensify. New gods are invoked. Old practices are doubled. Occasionally, practical measures emerge. Improved drainage, waste removal, ventilation. These interventions succeed without symbolic justification, but are still framed as appeasement. Survival reinforces belief regardless of mechanism. Medical knowledge becomes hierarchical. Master healers guard recipes. Apprentices swear oaths. Access is restricted. This preserves quality but limits dissemination. Innovation slows. When new treatments appear, they must be reconciled with tradition. Radical departures threaten authority and are resisted. Mental health occupies an ambiguous space. Distress without visible cause challenges symbolic frameworks. Some cultures interpret it as possession, others as imbalance of bodily fluids. Treatments range from counseling disguised as ritual to coercive confinement. Compassion varies. Understanding remains partial, but recognition itself marks progress. Birth and death bracket medical concern. Midwifery develops specialized knowledge passed through women, often outside formal institutions. This parallel system preserves techniques neglected by male-dominated hierarchies. Tension arises between experiential knowledge and sanctioned authority. Over time, institutions absorb or suppress these practices, reshaping them. Aging introduces chronic conditions. Care shifts from cure to management. Diet, routine, and moderation gain emphasis. Longevity becomes a marker of wisdom. Elders are consulted, reinforcing the link between survival and knowledge. Medicine merges with ethics, prescribing how to live, not just how to heal. The watcher's influence appears again in sustained observation. Healing improves when someone pays attention long enough to notice slow effects. This patience contrasts with ritual immediacy. Where observation dominates, outcomes improve. Where symbolism overwhelms, stagnation follows. Societies oscillate between these poles. Eventually, writing crystallizes medical knowledge further. Case histories appear. Outcomes are compared. Patterns refine. Yet theory lags behind practice. Without understanding underlying causes, treatment remains adaptive rather than predictive. Success depends on memory and experience rather than universal principles. Civilization's early medicine reflects its broader character. It blends observation with authority, care with control, empathy with exclusion. It saves lives while reinforcing hierarchy. It alleviates suffering while interpreting it through moral lenses. Modern medicine descends from this complex ancestry. Clinical protocols echo ancient routines. Hospitals echo temples. White coats replace robes. Data replaces omens. Yet the core challenge remains unchanged. Bodies resist order. Illness interrupts schedules. Healing requires humility before complexity. The first cities learned that health could never be fully controlled, only managed through attention and adaptation. Their healers worked in shadowed rooms, balancing herbs and words, touch and timing. They did not conquer disease, but they learned to live with it, building care into civilization's fabric. In doing so, they revealed a truth still relevant. The measure of a society is not how it eliminates suffering, but how it responds when order fails inside the human body. Knowledge changes nature once it can be stored outside the mind. In early societies, memory lived in bodies, in hands that knew how to shape clay, in eyes trained to read weather, in voices that carried stories across generations. When writing appears, it does not simply record what is known. It transforms what knowledge is. Ideas become detachable, transferable without the presence of the knower. Authority shifts from experience to inscription. The earliest texts are pragmatic. They list deliveries, debts, rituals, and omens. There is no philosophical preface explaining why these things matter. Their importance is assumed. Writing functions as command rather than reflection. To write something down is to fix it, to remove it from debate. Literacy becomes power not because of creativity, but because of permanence. Schools emerge to manage this power. Apprentices learn to copy before they learn to compose. Accuracy is prized over originality. A mistake is not an alternative view. It is an error with consequences. Training emphasizes discipline of hand and mind. The student submits to the form before understanding its meaning. This shapes thought. When knowledge is learned through copying, deviation feels dangerous. Archives grow, and with them, the illusion of completeness. A stored record appears total, even when it is selective. What is not written fades. Oral traditions lose status. Elders who once carried history and memory are replaced by tablets that can be stored, retrieved, and consulted impersonally. Knowledge becomes impersonal. It belongs to institutions rather than people. Classification follows naturally. Texts are grouped by subject, date, or authority. Categories emerge, simplifying retrieval while shaping perception. Once something is classified, it is easier to manage and harder to see differently. The world begins to appear organized according to the archive's logic. Ambiguity becomes noise. Libraries formalize this process. They centralize knowledge physically and symbolically. Access becomes regulated. To enter a library is to enter sanctioned memory. What lies outside is unofficial, suspect, or forgotten. Control over access translates to control over interpretation. Those who curate texts curate reality. Commentary arises as a response to fixation. Readers interpret, explain, and reconcile contradictions. Over time, commentary accumulates, sometimes eclipsing original texts. Authority shifts from authors to interpreters. Expertise becomes layered. To know something requires knowing how it has been explained before. Innovation must navigate precedent. Errors in texts propagate widely. A mistaken assumption copied faithfully becomes tradition. Correction requires authority, not evidence alone. This inertia stabilizes knowledge while embedding flaws. The archive remembers confidently, not necessarily accurately. Education adapts to produce functionaries rather than thinkers. Curricula focus on established material. Exams test recall. Advancement rewards conformity. Curiosity persists, but is channeled narrowly. Questions are permitted only within defined boundaries. Beyond them lies irrelevance or heresy. Myths about lost libraries and forbidden books reflect awareness of this power. Stories warn that knowledge hoarded or destroyed can reshape civilization. Fire becomes symbolic enemy. When texts burn, societies feel amputated. Recovery focuses on reconstruction of records rather than reevaluation of values. Writing also alters perception of time. Records extend memory backward, creating long histories that dwarf individual lives. This scale encourages humility and obedience. If ancestors lived by these rules for centuries, who is one person to question them? Longevity becomes proof of correctness. Yet writing enables dissent quietly. Marginal notes question main texts. Alternate copies circulate. Underground schools form. Literacy empowers resistance as much as control. The same permanence that enforces orthodoxy preserves critique for future discovery. Science, in its earliest form, emerges from systematic record-keeping. Observations logged over time reveal patterns invisible to memory alone. Astronomy benefits first. Tables of star positions accumulate, enabling prediction. Prediction reinforces trust in recording. A feedback loop forms. Record, predict, obey. Philosophy appears later, asking not how to record, but what recording means. Such questions feel dangerous because they threaten the archive's authority. Early philosophers often frame inquiry as recovery of forgotten truths rather than invention, presenting novelty as remembrance to avoid rejection. Language itself shifts under written dominance. Speech becomes informal, flexible. Writing becomes formal, rigid. Prestige attaches to written language. Dialects flatten into standards. Expression narrows. Nuance yields to clarity. What cannot be written easily loses legitimacy. The watcher's role echoes here. Observation without inscription is fragile. Inscription without observation is hollow. Balance matters. When writing outruns attention, knowledge stagnates. When attention lacks storage, knowledge disappears. Early civilizations oscillate between these extremes, never fully resolving tension. Legal systems crystallize through texts. Precedents accumulate. Judgments cite documents rather than circumstances. Law becomes predictable but less humane. Exceptions require justification against written norms. Mercy becomes discretionary rather than intuitive. Religion absorbs writing as revelation. Sacred texts claim ultimate authority. Interpretation becomes priestly monopoly. Dissent becomes sacrilege. Yet the act of writing the sacred also exposes it to comparison, translation, and critique. The written word invites analysis, even as it resists it. Modern information systems magnify these ancient dynamics. Databases replace tablets. Algorithms replace scribes. Storage seems infinite. Yet selection still shapes reality. What is indexed exists. What is not disappears. The archive grows while attention fragments. The first cities did not foresee these consequences when they pressed reeds into clay. They sought reliability. They found permanence. In gaining memory beyond the body, they reshaped thought itself. Knowledge became something one could possess, control, and inherit. Civilization learned to remember too well. In doing so, it risked forgetting how to watch. The challenge remains unchanged, to ensure that what is stored does not replace what is seen. Writing preserves, but only attention understands. Without it, archives grow heavy, and wisdom thins beneath their weight. Belief does not disappear when systems mature. It reorganizes. As cities grow complex, faith shifts from personal experience to institutional rhythm. Early spirituality is intimate, shaped by fear of storms and gratitude for harvests. In dense societies, belief becomes scheduled. Festivals align with calendars. Prayers follow scripts. Sacred days punctuate labor cycles, offering sanctioned pauses that reinforce obedience to time. Temples embody this transformation. They are not merely places of worship, but engines of coordination. Priests manage offerings, redistribute food, and interpret signs. The sacred legitimizes administration. When a ritual succeeds, the system gains credit. When it fails, the failure is attributed to impurity or neglect, not structure. Belief absorbs error, protecting order. Pantheons expand alongside bureaucracy. Gods acquire portfolios mirroring civic roles: agriculture, justice, war, trade. Each domain has a divine counterpart, reinforcing specialization. Conflicts between gods mirror political tensions. Myths become allegories for governance. Stories teach compliance subtly, embedding civic lessons in cosmic drama. Prayer itself evolves. Early pleas are raw, immediate. Later prayers are formalized, recited verbatim. Precision matters. Saying the wrong words at the wrong time risks disaster. Language becomes ritual technology. Fluency equals piety. Those trained in liturgy gain influence. Access to the divine is mediated by expertise. Sacrifice formalizes exchange between humans and gods. Offerings follow strict ratios. Excess is discouraged. Waste is taboo. This mirrors economic rationality. The sacred economy teaches restraint while channeling surplus to temples. Redistribution is framed as generosity rather than taxation. Gratitude replaces resentment. Pilgrimage emerges as controlled movement. People travel along prescribed routes to sanctioned sites. This mobility reinforces centrality. Peripheral communities send bodies and resources inward, acknowledging authority. Stories of miracles at centers attract further flow. Geography becomes sacred hierarchy. Divination institutionalizes uncertainty management. Oracles, omens, and signs provide structured responses to ambiguity. Decisions are deferred to ritual, relieving leaders of sole responsibility. If outcomes fail, blame rests with interpretation, not choice. Divination thus stabilizes leadership under risk. Moral codes crystallize through religious narrative. Behaviors that threaten order are condemned as sins. Compliance becomes virtue. Internal regulation replaces external force. Guilt supplements punishment. This internalization reduces enforcement costs while deepening control. The ideal citizen polices themselves. Heresy reveals the system's boundaries. Alternative beliefs challenge monopoly over meaning. Responses vary from debate to suppression. The severity of reaction correlates with perceived threat to order. Tolerance exists when dissent is marginal. When it gains followers, repression follows. Unity is prioritized over truth. Ritual time softens the rigidity of calendars. Festivals invert roles temporarily, allowing release. Masks, feasts, and transgression occur within limits. This controlled chaos renews allegiance by offering relief. Afterward, normal order resumes stronger for having been briefly broken. Death rituals reinforce continuity. Funerals reaffirm social bonds. Ancestor worship links present to past, legitimizing inheritance. The dead become silent supporters of existing hierarchies. Remembering them reinforces acceptance of tradition. Forgetting becomes disrespect. Conversion narratives appear as societies interact. Victors impose gods alongside laws. Conversion is framed as enlightenment, not submission. New beliefs overwrite old ones, integrating conquered populations. Syncretism absorbs local traditions, maintaining continuity while asserting dominance. Religion adapts to survive. Writing solidifies belief further. Sacred texts fix doctrine. Oral flexibility fades. Interpretation becomes gatekept. Orthodoxy emerges. Disputes hinge on wording rather than experience. Faith becomes textual. Literacy becomes spiritual privilege. Mysticism arises as countercurrent. Individuals seek direct experience beyond ritual. Visions, trances, and ascetic practices bypass institutions. Authorities tolerate or co-opt these movements depending on utility. When mysticism threatens structure, it is branded dangerous. When it reinforces devotion, it is sanctified. Ethics extend beyond ritual into daily life. Dietary laws, dress codes, and behavioral norms shape identity continuously. Belief becomes visible. Conformity is monitored socially. Difference stands out. Community cohesion strengthens at the cost of diversity. The Watcher's legacy persists in the emphasis on alignment. Just as early observers aligned cities to stars, religion aligns lives to meaning. Attention is redirected upward and inward. Observation of nature becomes observation of conscience. Control migrates from environment to self. Modern belief systems inherit these dynamics, even when stripped of gods. Ideologies replace deities. Values replace commandments. Rituals persist as ceremonies and holidays. Moral language frames civic duty. Faith in progress. Markets or nations echoes ancient structures. Civilization did not eliminate belief. It refined it into infrastructure. Faith became predictable, manageable, and productive. It soothed anxiety while reinforcing systems that generated it. By organizing meaning, societies organized behavior. The earliest cities learned that belief is most powerful when it feels timeless. By embedding faith into calendars, architecture, and text, they ensured continuity. Generations grew up inside, meaning already decided. Questioning felt like betrayal, not inquiry. Belief thus became the quiet partner of power. It asked little and gave much: comfort, explanation, belonging. In return, it asked for trust. And once trust was given, it shaped lives more thoroughly than any wall or law, guiding actions even when no authority watched at all. Exploration does not begin with curiosity alone. It begins with pressure. When cities exhaust nearby resources, movement becomes necessity rather than adventure. Early expansion follows rivers, coasts, and familiar winds, extending networks rather than breaking into the unknown. Traders, scouts, and emissaries move first, carrying standards of weight, language, and ritual with them. Wherever they stop, they recreate fragments of home, reducing risk through familiarity. Navigation emerges from accumulated observation. Coastlines are memorized by landmarks, currents, and stars. Sailors learn to read color changes in water and the behavior of birds. These skills are practical, taught through repetition rather than theory. Over time, routes stabilize. What was once dangerous becomes routine. Distance shrinks psychologically before it shrinks physically. Maps appear late in this process. Before representation, there is itinerary, sequences of known points linked by experience. Early maps are not mirrors of space, but summaries of usefulness. They exaggerate centers and compress peripheries. Accuracy matters less than guidance. A map's authority lies in trust, not precision. Expansion introduces encounter. Different societies meet with different calendars, gods, and measures. Initial exchange is cautious. Gifts precede trade. Gestures replace contracts. Misunderstanding is common, sometimes fatal. Over time, patterns stabilize. Shared pidgin languages develop. Standards negotiate themselves. Difference becomes manageable. Colonies form as extensions of existing order. Settlers carry laws, rituals, and hierarchies intact. Local adaptation is limited. The colony's purpose is extraction and control, not synthesis. Indigenous knowledge is used selectively, often stripped of context. What works is adopted. What challenges authority is suppressed. Military presence follows trade. Forts secure routes. Garrisons protect investments. Violence underwrites expansion quietly. Resistance is framed as disorder. Pacification becomes moral language. The expansionist narrative emphasizes progress and protection while obscuring displacement. Resource flow reshapes centers. Exotic goods arrive: metals, dyes, spices. Prestige attaches to rarity. Elites display distance through consumption. Demand accelerates extraction at edges, increasing pressure to expand further. The system feeds itself. Administration adapts to distance through delegation. Governors rule in the name of distant authority. Communication delays grant autonomy. Corruption flourishes in gaps. Periodic inspections attempt control, but local realities diverge from central intention. Empires stretch unevenly. Cultural exchange accompanies material flow. Stories travel with goods. Myths blend. Technologies diffuse. Yet exchange is asymmetrical. Dominant cultures absorb selectively, framing adoption as improvement. Subordinate cultures adapt defensively, preserving identity through ritual and memory. Borders harden as expansion stabilizes. Lines are drawn where movement once flowed. These lines require justification. Treaties formalize them. Maps render them visible. Crossing becomes transgression. Identity aligns with territory. Belonging becomes geographic. Environmental impact accumulates. Deforestation increases. Soils degrade. Wildlife retreats. Early observers notice change, but incentives favor continuation. Short-term gain outweighs long-term balance. Collapse is delayed through further expansion, exporting strain elsewhere. Knowledge systems evolve to manage scale. Accounting tracks distant assets. Law codifies relationships across regions. Standard languages are imposed to ease administration. Local dialects diminish. Uniformity simplifies control while erasing nuance. Religion supports expansion by universalizing meaning. Missionary activity accompanies conquest. Conversion reframes domination as salvation. Syncretism softens resistance, blending beliefs while asserting hierarchy. Faith travels efficiently where armies cannot remain. Rebellion exposes limits. Distance weakens loyalty. Peripheral regions resist extraction. Suppression consumes resources, reducing profit. Empires oscillate between expansion and consolidation. Overreach invites fragmentation. The psychology of expansion shapes identity. Success breeds entitlement. Decline breeds nostalgia. Myths of golden ages justify renewed aggression. Memory selects victories, forgetting costs. History becomes instruction for repetition. The watcher's influence persists in navigation and planning. Attention to patterns enables expansion. Misreading patterns leads to disaster. Lost fleets and failed colonies punctuate history, reminders that observation must remain grounded. Hubris blinds. Modern globalization echoes these ancient dynamics. Supply chains replace caravans. Satellites replace stars. Expansion continues digitally and economically. Distance feels irrelevant, yet dependency deepens. Centers consume, peripheries supply. The earliest expansions taught civilization that growth solves problems temporarily while creating new ones. Movement relieves pressure but spreads structure. Order travels outward, carrying both stability and strain. In learning to move across the world, humanity learned to replicate itself. Every new shore became a mirror of old hierarchies, adjusted for terrain but faithful in spirit. Expansion did not liberate societies from limits. It postponed reckoning. The legacy of early exploration is ambivalent. It connected worlds and widened horizons while narrowing choices. It taught that the unknown can be managed, mapped, and absorbed. But it also taught that management has a cost, one paid unevenly across space and time. Civilization expanded because it had to. It continued because it could. And in doing so, it discovered that the farther it traveled, the more closely it carried itself along, unable to escape the structures it built to survive. Inequality does not arrive as an accident. It grows as an arrangement. In small groups, difference exists but remains visible and negotiable. Everyone knows who has more and why. In cities, scale obscures origin. Surplus accumulates in places few can see, managed by people few can name. Distance forms between effort and reward, and within that distance, hierarchy settles. Property marks the turning point. Land once used becomes land owned. Ownership implies exclusion, the right to deny access backed by force or law. Records make this durable. A boundary written is stronger than one walked. Over time, ownership detaches from use. Absentee control becomes possible. Those who work land need not benefit from it. Inheritance accelerates stratification. Wealth persists beyond individual ability, granting advantage before effort. Lineage becomes currency. Names carry weight independent of action. This stability comforts elites while frustrating others. Opportunity narrows. Mobility slows. The system presents continuity as virtue. Law formalizes difference under the banner of fairness. Equal rules apply unequally when starting points differ. Contracts presume freedom even when necessity coerces choice. Punishments scale poorly, devastating the poor while inconveniencing the rich. The appearance of neutrality masks structural bias. Urban design reflects this reality. Central districts concentrate wealth, resources, and security. Peripheries absorb labor and risk. Movement between zones is regulated by cost, time, and permission. The city teaches inequality spatially. To walk certain streets is to feel exclusion without explanation. Education reinforces division subtly. Access varies by class. Curricula reflect dominant values. Skills rewarded align with existing power structures. Those trained to manage rise above those trained to serve. Merit is measured within narrow definitions that favor those already positioned to succeed. Culture absorbs hierarchy through normalization. Luxury becomes aspiration. Poverty becomes moralized. Success stories emphasize exceptional escape, implying failure elsewhere is deserved. Structural critique is deflected by individual narrative. Hope persists without challenge. Religion both challenges and supports inequality. Teachings about compassion and humility coexist with doctrines of divine favor. Wealth is framed alternately as blessing or burden, but rarely dismantled. Charity soothes conscience without altering structure. Given replaces justice. Violence enforces boundaries when consent falters. Policing protects property disproportionately. Rebellion is criminalized. Order is prioritized over equity. Stability becomes justification. The fear of chaos silences reform. Those with least to lose are portrayed as threats. Economic specialization deepens dependence. Those without assets sell labor repeatedly, vulnerable to fluctuation. Those with capital absorb shocks. Risk distributes unevenly. Crises widen gaps. Recovery favors those positioned to invest. Inequality compounds. Measurement disguises disparity. Statistics average suffering. Growth masks concentration. Numbers flatten experience. A rising total suggests improvement even as distribution worsens. Abstraction shields decision-makers from consequence. Language adapts accordingly. Terms like productivity, efficiency, and competitiveness replace discussions of well-being. Humans become inputs. Communities become markets. Decisions prioritize indicators over lives. Responsibility diffuses across systems until no one feels accountable. Resistance persists in cycles. Movements form demanding redistribution, representation, dignity. Gains occur, often temporary. Elites adapt, conceding symbolically while preserving core advantage. Reform becomes safety valve rather than transformation. Myths evolve to justify hierarchy. Stories of natural order, inherent difference, and destined leadership circulate. Pseudoscience and tradition reinforce them. Challenges are framed as unnatural or dangerous. Stability is sacralized. The watcher's ethos contrasts sharply here. Observation reveals disparities' origins clearly. Attention exposes how systems channel benefit upward, but observation without power changes little. Knowledge of injustice does not guarantee its correction. Awareness can coexist with acceptance. Technological change reshapes inequality without erasing it. New tools create new elites. Access determines benefit. Automation displaces labor. Wealth concentrates around ownership of systems. Promises of democratization repeat old patterns. Urban anonymity exacerbates alienation. Suffering becomes invisible. Empathy thins. People pass each other without connection. Responsibility feels abstract. Inequality becomes background noise, noticed only in crisis. Art and literature respond by documenting disparity, giving voice to the marginalized. These expressions preserve memory and provoke reflection. Sometimes they inspire reform. Often they are absorbed as entertainment, neutralized by distance. Migration complicates the picture. Movement offers escape for some while draining resources from others. Host societies exploit labor while restricting belonging. Borders regulate inequality spatially, determining whose suffering counts. Generational effects deepen injustice. Childhood conditions shape lifetimes. Early deprivation limits potential permanently. Systems claiming equal opportunity ignore accumulated disadvantage. Blame falls on individuals rather than structures. Despite this, societies rely on belief in fairness to function. If inequality were fully acknowledged as rigged, consent would erode. Narratives of possibility sustain participation. Hope becomes a stabilizing force even when evidence contradicts it. The persistence of inequality reveals civilization's unresolved tension between coordination and compassion. Systems excel at organizing production but falter at distributing dignity. Efficiency triumphs over equity repeatedly. Understanding this does not resolve it. Awareness alone cannot dismantle arrangements centuries in the making. But it reframes the problem. Inequality is not failure, it is feature. It emerges predictably from certain structures. The earliest cities did not intend this outcome. They sought stability, abundance, order. Inequality grew as a side effect of success, then entrenched itself as necessity. Over time, it was defended as natural. To see inequality clearly is to recognize civilization's shadow. Every gain casts one. The task is not to deny the shadow, but to decide how much darkness is acceptable. History shows that ignoring it invites rupture. Civilization endures by managing imbalance, never eliminating it. The question that remains is whether future systems can observe themselves honestly enough to change course, or whether hierarchy will continue to disguise itself as destiny, repeating the same arrangement under new names, generation after generation. Collapse rarely arrives as a single event. It announces itself through small failures that feel temporary, repairable, easy to ignore. A canal silts faster than expected. A harvest falls just short. A tax is raised slightly higher than before. Each adjustment preserves the system for another season while increasing strain beneath the surface. Stability becomes maintenance rather than resilience. Complex societies depend on coordination across many layers. When one layer falters, others compensate. This redundancy masks vulnerability. Elites interpret survival as proof of strength, mistaking adaptation for immunity. Over time, compensation becomes routine. What was once exceptional becomes normal. Resources flow toward crisis management instead of renewal. Environmental stress often initiates decline. Soil exhaustion follows intensive cultivation. Forests retreat under demand for fuel and construction. Water tables drop. These changes occur gradually, spreading responsibility thinly. No single decision causes collapse, so no single decision can prevent it. The system continues until margins vanish. Economic pressure amplifies ecological strain. As yields diminish, extraction intensifies. Short-term survival overrides long-term balance. Debt increases. Inequality widens. Those with power insulate themselves while others absorb risk. Social trust erodes. Cooperation weakens precisely when it is most needed. political response tends toward rigidity. Faced with uncertainty, authorities tighten control, laws multiply, punishments escalate, surveillance expands. Innovation is discouraged because it threatens order. Yet rigidity reduces adaptability. Systems optimized for stability fail under change. The very measures meant to preserve society accelerate decline. Information systems degrade subtly. Records become inaccurate as administrators manipulate data to avoid blame. Bad news is delayed or softened. Leaders make decisions based on distorted inputs. Reality diverges from reports. Correction arrives late, if at all. The archive lies convincingly. Belief systems respond by intensifying ritual. When outcomes worsen, devotion increases. More offerings are demanded, more festivals are declared. Faith becomes compensatory rather than guiding. Doubt is framed as treason. Questioning feels dangerous. This suppresses honest assessment. Violence rises internally before it erupts externally. Crime increases. Policing hardens. Repression replaces legitimacy. Public trust collapses. Protest becomes rebellion. The state responds with force, draining resources further. Conflict consumes what remains of surplus. Migration accelerates collapse dynamics. Those with means leave early, reducing tax base and skills. Those without means remain, bearing worsening conditions. Influx elsewhere strains neighboring systems. Borders harden. Human movement becomes crisis multiplier. Trade networks fray. Distant dependencies fail when transport becomes unreliable. Specialization backfires. Cities reliant on imports face scarcity. Local production cannot ramp quickly enough. Markets panic. Prices spike. Hoarding replaces exchange. Cultural production reflects anxiety. Art grows nostalgic or apocalyptic. Myths of past greatness circulate. Scapegoats are named. Blame shifts outward or downward. Unity fractures. Shared identity dissolves into factions. The watcher's principle of attention fades. Observation is replaced by reaction. Leaders respond to symptoms rather than causes. Firefighting becomes governance. Long-term thinking disappears under urgency. Collapse accelerates once foresight is lost. Collapse does not mean disappearance. It means simplification. Populations shrink. Institutions dissolve. Complexity sheds layers. Survivors adapt to smaller scales. Some knowledge is lost. Some persists informally. Life continues, altered. Archaeological layers record this process clearly. Grand buildings are abandoned gradually. Repairs stop. Materials are scavenged. Spaces repurposed. There is no dramatic finale, only quiet withdrawal. Civilization recedes like a tide. After collapse, memory fractures. Survivors reinterpret the past. Myths exaggerate disaster or deny it. Responsibility blurs. Lessons are simplified. Future societies inherit distorted narratives, repeating mistakes under new conditions. Recovery depends on retained knowledge and remaining ecology. Where soils regenerate and skills persist, complexity can return. Where damage is severe, stagnation follows. Collapse resets possibilities unevenly. The cycle repeats across history, with variation but familiar rhythm. Growth, strain, rigidity, breakdown. Each iteration adapts details while preserving structure. Human ingenuity solves immediate problems while creating systemic risk. Modern societies exhibit the same patterns at greater scale. Global interdependence increases efficiency and vulnerability simultaneously. Local failures propagate globally. Collapse, if it comes, will not be uniform. Some regions will simplify while others endure. Understanding collapse requires abandoning moral narratives. Societies do not fall because of decadence or virtue. They fall because complexity outpaces capacity. When maintenance costs exceed benefits, contraction follows naturally. This perspective reframes decline as process rather than punishment. It invites humility. No system is permanent. Longevity depends on balancing growth with restraint, coordination with adaptability. The earliest cities learned to build order from chaos. They also learned, unintentionally, how order decays. Collapse is not the opposite of civilization. It is one of its phases. Recognizing this does not prevent it, but it can soften impact. Attention remains the scarce resource. Those who notice strain early can adjust. Those who cling to stability until it breaks face abrupt loss. History rewards neither optimism nor pessimism, but awareness. Civilization survives not by denying collapse, but by learning from it honestly. Whether that learning occurs in time remains uncertain. What is certain is that collapse leaves traces, and those traces warn future builders quietly if anyone is still watching. Recovery never restores what was lost. It rearranges what remains. After collapse, societies do not rebuild complexity immediately. They learn again how to live with fewer layers, fewer rules, fewer intermediaries. Daily life contracts toward necessity. Exchange becomes local. Authority becomes personal. Memory shortens, not by choice, but by circumstance. In the aftermath, survival favors adaptability over efficiency. Skills once considered marginal regain importance. Repair matters more than production. Reuse replaces expansion. Knowledge circulates orally again, carried by those who remember fragments of older systems. This memory is uneven. Some techniques vanish entirely. Others persist because they solve immediate problems. Small communities reorganize around kinship, geography, and shared labor. Decision-making becomes direct. Consensus replaces administration. Conflict still exists, but scale limits its spread. Without large surpluses to fight over, incentives for organized violence diminish. Defense becomes situational rather than institutional. The landscape plays a decisive role. Areas spared ecological damage recover faster. Rivers cleanse. Forests return. Wildlife rebounds. Human activity adapts to these rhythms rather than reshaping them aggressively. Agriculture diversifies. Monocultures give way to mixed strategies that hedge risk. Yields may be lower, but resilience improves. Material culture simplifies. Monumental architecture ceases. Tools become multifunctional. A single object serves many purposes. Craftsmanship emphasizes durability. A well-made item is valued because replacement is difficult. This fosters respect for material limits. Belief systems adjust accordingly. Grand theologies fragment into localized practices. Rituals focus on protection, fertility, and continuity. Sacred sites shift from monumental centers to natural features. Meaning reattaches to place rather than institution. Faith becomes intimate again. Trade networks reemerge cautiously. Initial exchange occurs between neighboring communities. Trust rebuilds slowly. Over time, roots extend. Standardization returns piecemeal. Measures differ by region. Flexibility compensates for inconsistency. Commerce grows without assuming permanence. Leadership in recovery phases depends on competence rather than lineage. Those who organize food, water, and defense gain influence. Authority remains conditional. Failure costs trust quickly. This accountability limits accumulation of power. Hierarchy exists but remains shallow. Technology evolves selectively. Innovations that reduce dependence are favored. Those requiring complex supply chains are avoided. Simpler solutions prevail. This conservatism slows progress while stabilizing life. The memory of collapse discourages excess. Writing returns unevenly. Where literacy persists, records resume in modest form. Genealogies, agreements, and calendars appear. They lack the density of earlier archives. Memory is shared between inscription and practice. Forgetting is accepted as part of life. Education becomes practical. Skills pass through demonstration. Apprenticeship dominates. Theory follows experience. Curiosity persists but is grounded. Abstract speculation feels indulgent when survival demands attention. As stability increases, surplus reappears. Specialization follows. Crafts refine. Trade expands. Gradually, complexity rebuilds. The cycle begins anew, though never identically. Lessons from collapse linger culturally, shaping caution and myth. Myths from recovery periods emphasize humility. Stories warn against hubris and overreach. Ancestors are remembered as both builders and destroyers. Balance becomes moral ideal. Excess is condemned rhetorically, even as it tempts materially. Over generations, these lessons fade. New elites arise. Institutions solidify. Efficiency regains appeal. Memory of collapse transforms into legend, then abstraction. The caution that once constrained growth erodes. Ambition returns. The watcher's ethic resurfaces intermittently. Some individuals prioritize observation and restraint. They notice patterns, warn of strain, advocate moderation. Their influence depends on trust. In prosperous times, they are ignored. In crisis, they are remembered. Archaeology captures these cycles as layers of reuse. Foundations are repurposed. Walls become quarries. Old roads guide new paths. Continuity persists beneath change. Civilization is palimpsest rather than sequence. Modern societies romanticize collapse recovery as renaissance. This framing obscures hardship. Recovery is slow, uneven, and often brutal. Many do not survive to benefit. Progress resumes at human cost. Understanding recovery reframes collapse as transformation rather than endpoint. Systems shed complexity to regain viability. This does not justify collapse, but it contextualizes it. Life adapts because it must. Resilience emerges not from strength, but from flexibility. Societies that tolerate diversity of practice recover faster. Those clinging to rigid models struggle. Uniformity simplifies administration, but hinders adaptation. The cycle's persistence suggests limits to linear progress. Growth and contraction alternate. Each phase teaches different skills. Civilization accumulates experience across cycles, though imperfectly. Future builders inherit both ruins and stories. What they choose to preserve shapes what follows. Recovery is opportunity disguised as loss. It allows reconsideration of priorities, if memory permits. Attention remains decisive. Those who observe quietly during recovery guide renewal wisely. Those who rush to rebuild old structures repeat mistakes. History does not demand repetition, but it enables it. Civilization survives not by escaping cycles, but by navigating them with awareness. Recovery is where that awareness is forged, tested by scarcity and sharpened by memory. Whether it endures beyond abundance remains uncertain, but it is here, in the aftermath, that humanity learns again how to begin. Innovation rarely announces itself as rebellion. It enters quietly, framed as improvement. After recovery stabilizes daily life, Curiosity returns, not as hunger for novelty, but as pressure to reduce effort. Small adjustments accumulate. A tool is reshaped to last longer. A process is shortened by one step. Each change feels minor. Together, they alter trajectories. Technology evolves first where necessity persists. Agriculture refines again. New crop rotations appear, spreading risk. Selective breeding improves yield gradually. Irrigation is redesigned with lessons learned from past failure, allowing overflow rather than resisting it completely. Flexibility replaces rigidity. Systems tolerate variance instead of demanding perfection. Energy use expands cautiously. Wood remains central, but alternatives emerge where scarcity demands them. Wind and water are harnessed through mills, converting natural movement into predictable labor. This marks a turning point. Energy detaches from muscle. Productivity increases without proportional population growth. Surplus returns, cautiously welcomed. Craft specialization deepens alongside these changes. Artisans experiment with alloys, glazes, and forms. Knowledge circulates through guilds rather than institutions. Secrecy protects advantage. Innovation spreads unevenly, clustering in regions with supportive ecology and trade access. Progress becomes patchwork. Measurement evolves to manage new complexity. Timekeeping improves. Mechanical clocks appear, regulating labor more precisely than celestial observation alone. Time fragments further, divided into smaller units. Productivity is recalculated. Punctuality becomes virtue. Deviations attract discipline. Control tightens quietly. Transportation advances reshape perception of distance again. Improved hulls, harnesses, and road surfaces accelerate movement. Markets integrate. Information travels faster. Delay shrinks. Expectations adjust accordingly. Patience erodes. Speed becomes value. Writing adapts to handle increased flow. Paper replaces heavier media. Duplication accelerates. Texts proliferate. Literacy expands beyond elite circles. This diffusion destabilizes authority. Interpretation escapes monopoly. Ideas circulate unpredictably. Institutions respond by standardizing language and education. Orthography fixes spelling. Grammar is codified. Uniformity eases communication while narrowing expression. Dialects decline. A shared language strengthens identity and control simultaneously. Scientific thinking coalesces from accumulated observation and record. Experimentation emerges as method, not accident. Hypotheses are tested deliberately. Failure becomes informative rather than shameful. This shift changes how truth is approached. Authority begins to compete with evidence. Conflict arises between tradition and innovation. Established powers resist change that threatens hierarchy. Innovators frame novelty as restoration of lost wisdom to avoid suppression. Progress advances under camouflage. Transformation appears gradual even when direction shifts sharply. Economies adapt to new productivity by expanding markets. Consumption increases. Desire outpaces need. Advertising in early forms shapes aspiration. Goods carry symbolism beyond function. Status reattaches to ownership of novelty. Inequality reasserts itself through access to innovation. Urban life intensifies again. Cities swell. Infrastructure strains. Sanitation becomes challenge. Disease patterns shift. Public health interventions reemerge, informed by better data but constrained by politics. Improvement occurs unevenly. Governance responds by bureaucratizing further. Regulation multiplies. Records expand. Efficiency improves while responsiveness declines. Systems grow opaque. Individuals feel distant from decision-making. alienation returns. Philosophical reflection intensifies in response. Thinkers question progress itself. Debates emerge over whether innovation liberates or enslaves. Ethics struggles to keep pace with capability. Responsibility diffuses across systems. The watcher's ethic becomes scientific discipline. Observation is formalized, attention is trained, instruments extend senses, telescopes, microscopes, and later devices reveal worlds unseen. Knowledge accelerates dramatically. Understanding deepens while humility lags. Environmental consequences resurface. Resource extraction intensifies. Landscapes transform again. Early warnings appear, often ignored. Confidence in technology fosters belief that solutions will arrive in time. Risk is deferred. Cultural narratives shift toward mastery. Humans imagine themselves as controllers of nature rather than participants. Progress myths flourish. The past is framed as primitive. Collapse memories fade into irrelevance. Yet innovation carries fragility. Complex systems require maintenance. Dependencies multiply. Failure cascades faster. The margin for error narrows. Resilience depends on constant adjustment. History reveals this pattern repeatedly. Innovation solves immediate constraints while introducing new ones. Each advance expands capacity and vulnerability simultaneously. Civilization accelerates. Convinced momentum equals safety. Understanding innovation's dual nature requires resisting simple narratives. It is neither salvation nor doom. It is force shaped by context and intention. Outcomes depend on how societies integrate change into values and structures. The earliest innovators did not seek transformation. They sought relief. They wanted less work, fewer losses, more predictability. Their solutions accumulated into revolutions they could not foresee. Later generations inherited consequences without context. Modern societies stand within this lineage. Innovation surrounds daily life, normalized and expected. Questioning it feels regressive. Yet history suggests restraint matters as much as creativity. Attention remains decisive. Innovation guided by observation adapts sustainably. Innovation driven by ambition outruns understanding. The difference determines whether change stabilizes or destabilizes. Civilization advances not by constant invention, but by integrating novelty wisely. The challenge is not to stop innovating, but to remember why. When purpose is forgotten, progress accelerates blindly. Part 14 reveals innovation as continuation rather than rupture. It is the same impulse that built canals and calendars, redirected through new tools. Whether it leads toward balance or collapse depends, as always, on who is watching, and whether anyone listens. The future is imagined long before it arrives. Societies rehearse what comes next through stories, models, and fears, shaping decisions in advance. These anticipations act as quiet governors. When tomorrow is pictured as abundant, risk feels acceptable. When it is pictured as fragile, caution dominates. In both cases, imagination steers behavior as decisively as law. Forecasting emerges from accumulated observation. Patterns noticed in climate, markets, and populations encourage projection. Early attempts are simple, extrapolations of harvest cycles, flood intervals, or dynastic succession. Over time, projection formalizes into calculation. Probability replaces prophecy. Confidence grows. The future appears manageable. Institutions build around this belief. Insurance spreads risk. Planning agencies allocate resources years ahead. Infrastructure projects assume stability across decades. These commitments bind present action to predicted conditions. When predictions hold, trust increases. When they fail, consequences magnify. Technology amplifies foresight while compressing time. Communication accelerates response. Feedback loops shorten. Decisions once revisable over seasons become fixed in moments. Speed rewards decisiveness but punishes hesitation. Reflection feels costly. Momentum substitutes for deliberation. Governance adapts by privileging metrics. Indicators summarize complexity into digestible signals. Targets guide policy. Success is measured numerically. This abstraction allows scale while obscuring nuance. What cannot be measured recedes from attention. Values shift subtly. Risk concentrates unevenly. Those insulated by wealth or position tolerate uncertainty more easily. Others bear consequences immediately. This asymmetry shapes acceptance of change. Progress for some arrives as instability for others. Tension accumulates. Narratives respond by polarizing. Optimism celebrates innovation and growth. Pessimism warns of collapse and loss. Both simplify. The former underestimates limits. The latter underestimates adaptation. Reality unfolds between them, uneven and contested. Environmental constraints assert themselves regardless of narrative. Climate variability increases. Resource depletion tightens margins. Systems strain under cumulative pressure. Responses oscillate between mitigation and denial. Short-term incentives resist long-term planning. Cultural memory struggles to guide action. Past collapses feel distant, abstracted into lessons without urgency. Warnings lose force without immediacy. Societies prioritize current stability over future resilience, repeating familiar patterns. Education shapes future perception. Training emphasizes skills suited to existing systems. Creativity is encouraged within bounds. Critical thinking is celebrated rhetorically while constrained structurally. Preparation favors adaptation to systems rather than transformation of them. Innovation accelerates uncertainty. New tools disrupt labor, identity, and governance faster than norms can adjust. Regulation lags. Experimentation outpaces ethics. Power accrues to those who deploy change first. Others react. Global interdependence complicates foresight. Local actions produce distant effects. Accountability diffuses. Decision-makers face incomplete feedback. Responsibility becomes collective yet feels personal to none. Coordination falters. Despite this, cooperation persists. Networks form to address shared risks. Knowledge circulates. Best practices spread. Progress occurs unevenly but meaningfully. Humanity demonstrates capacity to learn, though often late. The Watcher's ethic appears again as foresight discipline. Scenario planning, monitoring, and adaptive management echo ancient observation updated by data. Where applied sincerely, resilience improves. Where ignored, surprise dominates. Ethics confronts scale. Individual morality struggles to address systemic impact. Choices feel insignificant against global forces. This dissonance breeds apathy or extremism. Bridging scales remains challenge. Art and culture respond by imagining futures vividly. Utopias and dystopias explore consequences. These stories influence expectations, shaping willingness to act. Imagination becomes rehearsal for reality. Political systems strain to reconcile short electoral cycles with long-term needs. Incentives misalign. Courageous decisions risk immediate backlash for deferred benefit. Leadership becomes management of perception rather than substance. Technology offers tools for coordination and surveillance simultaneously. Transparency increases while privacy erodes. trust becomes fragile. Systems promise optimization while centralizing control. Acceptance hinges on perceived benefit. The future's ambiguity intensifies anxiety. People seek certainty through identity, ideology, or nostalgia. Simplified narratives offer comfort. Complexity feels threatening. This retreat undermines collective problem-solving. Yet adaptability remains humanity's strength. Communities innovate locally. Solutions emerge from necessity. Small-scale experiments inform broader change. Progress advances incrementally, often unnoticed. History suggests that futures imagined rigidly fail. Those approached flexibly endure. Planning must allow revision. Systems must tolerate error. Humility becomes strategic asset. The earliest cities believed alignment guaranteed stability. Later societies believed prediction would do the same. Both underestimated change. Awareness, not certainty, proves more reliable. Attention remains scarce. Distraction dilutes foresight. Those who observe patiently detect shifts early. Those consumed by immediacy react late. The difference shapes outcomes. The future is not destination, but process. It unfolds through interaction between intention and constraint. Control is partial. Influence is distributed. Responsibility is shared. Civilization's challenge is not to foresee perfectly, but to remain responsive. Structures must learn. Values must adapt. Power must listen. Part 15 frames the future not as promise or threat, but as mirror. It reflects present priorities amplified over time. What societies choose to watch now determines what arrives later. Whether attention sharpens or scatters will decide if change becomes collapse or renewal, not through prophecy, but through practice lived daily. The end of a long pattern rarely feels like an ending. It feels like normalization. What once demanded explanation becomes background, absorbed into daily expectation. Civilization does not announce its direction. It drifts there, guided by habits accumulated over centuries. By the time consequences appear undeniable, the behaviors that produced them feel inseparable from identity. Attention has always been the limiting factor. From the first observers who watched skies for years to modern systems that process oceans of data in seconds, the problem is not information, but focus. What is noticed shapes what is valued. What is ignored accumulates power quietly. Civilization's greatest transformations have occurred not when new tools appeared, but when attention shifted. The arc traced so far reveals a consistent tension. Order enables survival, but excess order constrains adaptation. Complexity multiplies capability while multiplying fragility. Abstraction frees coordination while distancing responsibility. Each solution carries shadow. Progress is never singular. It is braided with cost. What distinguishes moments of renewal from moments of collapse is not morality or intelligence, but responsiveness. Societies that notice strain early adjust gradually. Those that deny strain harden until adjustment becomes impossible. Collapse appears sudden only because warning signals were dismissed as noise. Modern systems amplify both risk and opportunity. Global coordination can mobilize resources at unprecedented scale. It can also propagate failure instantly. Decisions made far from consequence shape lives invisibly. Distance between action and impact tests empathy. When feedback weakens, learning slows, yet history resists fatalism. Patterns recur, but outcomes vary. Human behavior is not fixed, it is conditioned. Structures guide choices, but they do not eliminate agency. Change remains possible within constraints. The challenge is aligning agency with awareness. Education becomes pivotal here, not as credentialing, but as cultivation of attention. Teaching how to observe systems, recognize incentives, and question assumptions equips societies to adapt. Without this, knowledge accumulates without wisdom. Tools sharpen while judgment dulls. Culture plays equal role. Stories frame possibility. When narratives reward domination, extraction follows. When they honor balance, restraint gains prestige. Cultural change precedes structural change quietly, altering what people aspire to before institutions respond. Technology, often treated as driver, is better understood as amplifier. It magnifies intent. Deployed without reflection, it accelerates existing trajectories. Guided thoughtfully, it extends capacity responsibly. The difference lies not in devices, but in values. Power remains central. Concentrated power resists self-critique. Distributed power risks incoherence. Balance is difficult and dynamic. Mechanisms that invite feedback without paralysis are rare but essential. Transparency alone is insufficient without accountability. Environmental limits sharpen urgency. Unlike social systems, ecosystems do not negotiate. Degradation proceeds regardless of belief. Adaptation requires humility before non-human constraints. Recognition of dependence reframes progress from conquest to coexistence. The Watcher's legacy returns one final time as practice rather than myth. Watching means sustained attention without immediate reward. It requires patience in cultures addicted to speed. It privileges listening over assertion. This posture is uncomfortable, but effective. Civilization's future depends less on invention than on integration. Existing knowledge already outlines sustainable paths. Obstacles are political, economic, and psychological rather than technical. Alignment of incentives with long-term well-being remains central challenge. Hope, often dismissed as naive, functions as motivator when grounded. Despair paralyzes. False optimism blinds. Constructive hope acknowledges risk while committing to action. It is discipline rather than emotion. Small-scale initiatives offer templates. Local adaptations demonstrate viability. Scaling requires translation, not replication. Context matters. Uniform solutions fail where diversity is strength. Learning must remain iterative. The measure of progress shifts accordingly. Success is no longer maximal output, but resilience. Systems that bend without breaking out perform those optimized narrowly. Diversity, redundancy, and slack regain value. Efficiency yields to adaptability. Ethics re-enters center stage. Decisions increasingly affect distant others and future generations. Moral frameworks must expand temporally and spatially. Responsibility extends beyond immediate community. This expansion challenges intuition but reflects reality. Governance experiments cautiously with new forms. Participatory models, adaptive regulation, and cross-border cooperation attempt to match complexity. Results vary. Failure teaches as much as success when acknowledged honestly. Civilization stands not at a single crossroads, but within a field of choices made daily. Consumption patterns, political engagement, and cultural reinforcement accumulate directionally. No single act determines outcome, but trends compound. History does not promise happy endings. It offers continuity of learning opportunities. Each generation inherits both tools and consequences. What changes is awareness of interdependence. Never before has humanity understood its global footprint so clearly. This awareness carries responsibility. Ignorance can no longer serve as excuse. Choices made with knowledge carry moral weight. Action informed by observation honors the lineage of watchers who understood that survival depends on seeing clearly. The future will not resemble the past neatly. Novel challenges will emerge. Old patterns will reappear under new guises. The task is not prediction, but preparation through flexibility. Civilization is not a monolith. It is process. It unfolds through countless interactions shaped by values and structures. Steering it requires continuous attention, adjustment, and humility. The story traced across these parts does not end with certainty. It ends with capacity. Humanity possesses tools, memory, and awareness sufficient to choose differently. Whether it does so consistently remains open. What matters now is not believing in progress or fearing collapse, but practicing observation. To notice strain without panic. To act without illusion of control. To value continuity over dominance. In this posture, the long arc bends not toward perfection, but toward endurance. Civilization continues not by escaping its patterns, but by seeing them clearly enough to respond. That clarity, sustained and shared, remains the rarest resource. And as history suggests, it is the one that decides what comes next.